grief, like, okay, if I actually embrace it and face it for what it is, it brings me a sense of calm and a desire to focus on what's within my control.
When it comes to the climate and taking care of the planet and things like that and making a difference, man, it really is a collective effort, right? I mean,
Yeah.
one person recycling isn't really going to do much.
No.
Right? So when you're working.
Key ways to access mental health is being connected to something bigger than you, and also feeling grounded to where you are, which that's the earth, right? When we look at what are the best ways to, regulate your nervous system, it's being outside, moving in the sunshine.
Greetings, everybody. Welcome to Therapist Take. We are going to talk about treating climate anxiety, so don't go anywhere. Hello, Carrie.
Hello, Josh.
You got to figure out different ways to
say two words.
To work into it, yeah.
Okay.
We started something, and I'm like, now I got to do this every week.
Now it's going to have to stick. It's okay.
I like it.
Repetition is okay.
I know. I'm going to do it the same way every time.
Good.
All right. Well, welcome back.
Yeah, welcome back. 2 in a row.
I did really like David last week, having him on.
Oh, yeah.
Like, one, he was super... I think he could have probably just talked the whole time, and I mean, it's like he had tons of information.
Yes.
But I also had a lot of questions, so I asked him to come back, and I think we're working on a time to come back so we can do kind of a
Part 2?
Right. Yeah, which would be the third podcast we've done on polygraphs. But I think this one, the idea I have, will really kind of round it out.
Good.
So I'm hoping to get that scheduled. But today we have a unique topic we're going to talk about, which is climate anxiety. So I'll give everybody the episode breakdown in just a second. I want to talk about the housekeeping things real quickly that we go over on every episode. So if you're not new to the podcast, you can just zoom on past this because you know exactly what I'm going to say, which is if you're not watching this on YouTube, go over to YouTube and subscribe to our channel. Also, if you're listening to this on the audio platforms, stop what you're doing just for 1 second and go and give us a 5-star review, especially if you like it. But give us a 5-star review and then come back and finish listening to the episode. So it takes like 1 or 2 seconds to do that. So real quickly, before I introduce our guest, I am going to give the episode breakdown because we're going to talk about this really unique topic known as climate anxiety, and that it is a thing that people deal with. And if you're listening to this and this is not your thing, then I would just encourage you to just bypass this episode. It's not for you, but this is something that people deal with, and as mental health practitioners, we're here to help people. And that's the whole point of this podcast, is to get information out in a different way, and maybe it'll be helpful to people. Okay, so on the episode breakdown, we are going to first just kind of define what climate anxiety, what is it to begin with, then move into the psychological impact. We're going to talk about therapeutic tools for managing eco-anxiety, and then fostering hope and resilience. So that's what we're going to do.
Good. Sounds good.
Yeah, and my special guest to talk about this is one of our counselors here at Family Solutions, which is Mary Scruggs, who's an LMFT, and she's a certified partner trauma therapist, which kind of falls in the betrayal trauma realm. But this is kind of outside of that a little bit. This is a very unique field right now, from my understanding of treatment. And so she is the one that really brought it to our attention, and so that's why I thought she'd be the perfect person for having on the show today. So Mary, welcome to Therapist Take.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Yeah, I appreciate you providing us some books and resources. And I noticed you got yours kind of earmarked over there.
Yeah,
a little bit.
I have it here.
How did you stumble onto this form of treatment?
Okay, so I think it's funny just becoming a therapist, always the journey of what we think it will be, in what, the reason I became a therapist is no longer the reason I am a therapist. There's different reasons I'm a therapist. And then now that I'm getting more interested in specializations, it's there's no telling when I'm going to be specialized in 10 years because I just kind of find my way there.
Right.
But I think that in working with climate anxiety, it's kind of started with a personal journey, of experiencing climate anxiety myself, and kind of navigating my own emotions with that. And then I have to say, a lot of the influence has come from my sister, who works a lot with, I I guess I would just say like people who are impacted by climate change. She's worked with farmers and she's done a lot of work. She's worked in other countries, you know.
Is she a therapist too?
She's not a therapist, but she did study anthropology. So it's funny. We
Oh,
both
okay.
grew up studying people, you know.
Right, right.
Anyway, so and she's 8 years older than I am. So I feel like every so often I hit a milestone. I'm like, oh, that's what Sarah meant when she said that to me. It's my older
Yeah.
sister. So that's kind of my journey of just like my personal journey getting here. And then the more I read, the more I'm realizing that we don't have a ton of mental health clinicians, especially just in the area we live, who are actually trained to work with this directly, because it is one of those things where it's like you kind of get it or you don't. I think this will probably be something that I come back and talk to you guys more about at some point, because
great.
I'm I feel early on in my journey of figuring out like what does it mean for me as a mental health clinician to work with people with climate anxiety. So,
Right.
yeah.
I did notice, like, I don't know if I've ever really asked you about this, but you know, your Instagram handle is anxious, like anxious
anxious therapist.
You're anxious therapist, right? And you kind of remind me. I think there's a guy's like the angry therapist is a
I don't know
kind
if
of a
I've
social media influencer.
seen that
And,
person.
but anyways, I was curious about, like, you know, this is treating climate anxiety. Your Instagram handle is your anxious therapist. Like, is anxiety kind of just something you've been interested in anyways as a practitioner?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I experience, and I don't really shy away from sharing that because I'm human, right? And so I kind of just try to embrace it to a degree of, I think, humanizing me with my clients of, hey, I do experience this as well. And also here are tools that are helpful for not just you, but also me. So yeah, today I'm your climate anxious therapist.
Okay. Okay.
Right.
I'm just curious, what does it look like for the clients that are coming in with this? Like, because I'm sure this wasn't like you had already, you know, kind of an idea of this is what will mean that my
Yeah.
clients are struggling with this and this is what I'll do. It was probably something that you just started kind of noticing happening. Maybe, you know, you said maybe with you became more aware of just
Yeah.
the nature of it, but then you started using it at work too.
Yeah, so I've had clients where they don't come in for that reason, but it comes up in our clinical work. And then I think I found myself being at a point where I was like, I don't know what to say, because you know, personally, like, I'm also feeling kind of anxious about this. And I think that's where, and I've seen this path within myself and I've seen it in people around me, where I think if you are someone who does start to feel afraid of what climate change can mean, because nothing's guaranteed, right? Like, we don't know 100% what the future is going to look like with anything. But when people first start to really be afraid of it, I think it starts off very big and scary, very dreadful. It starts off with, if I don't see it, it's not happening. So I'm just not going to talk about it. And I think I was kind of in that place at one point. So when clients were coming to me talking about it, I was like, oh no, you're making me have to think about this. But then as you go through that process, and it's a lot like grief, like, okay, if I actually embrace it and face it for what it is, it brings me a sense of calm and a desire to focus on what's within my control. And so I think, like, it can start off really big and scary, and then it turns into, okay, well, what can I do with what I'm working with? And I actually think it's similar to betrayal trauma in some ways, where, you know, like, I think, like, what we talk about with clients often is, you cannot 100% trust anyone in the world, right? No person is ever to be 100% trusted. But we're not sitting here thinking about that on a daily basis, because why would I? Why would I constantly think, I don't know?
Right.
But then when you feel betrayed, it's that piece of evidence of reality that, oh, even the person I did trust the most actually is someone who can hurt me. And I think that that's similar in this anxiety of, like, oh, I don't actually know what the future holds. And that's, you know, for better or for worse.
I see the
Right?
uncertainty of it.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, like, there's
Yeah.
hope in that too, right? Of
Yeah.
like, just because it seems scary doesn't mean it will be.
Right.
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 Doesn't mean it
So
won't. But
before we
Good
go
comparison.
Before we go deeper into that, let's just go ahead and define it so we make sure that, I mean, I know it's easy to kind of assume what we think it is just
Yeah.
by the title of it, but
Yeah.
just to make sure, let's go ahead and talk about what
Can I
exactly
pull out my
is.
book?
Yeah, please.
so I don't use my own
So
words
this is
and
from
butcher it.
this is from the book Generational
Generation Dread.
which
Yeah.
we have.
Finding purpose in an age of climate anxiety.
Right. If you're listening to this, there will be a link to this
I
as well in the show notes and called Generational Dread, and so you're going to read
Yes.
their definition.
Yes. So they said, the most prevalent description of eco-anxiety is defined by the American Psychological Association as the chronic fear of environmental doom. And then she goes on to say, like, I would suggest that eco-anxiety is merely a sign of attachment to the world. And she gives like a few more. I really do recommend this book. She gives a few more breakdowns of kind of descriptive words of what people might feel. Like she even says here, most often though in the day to day, we just call these feelings by their right names: fear, terror, anxiety, depression, despair, overwhelm, stress, worry, sadness, rage, grief, guilt, heartbreak, and dread. I think that kind of sums it up.
So what is it? Is there some kind of trigger for it? Usually, you were talking about like betrayal trauma and how that is that type of anxiety that comes from that is triggered by a betrayal, right? Like a deep relational betrayal.
But I think that there's a lot of grief that is experienced, and that's something else she kind of talks about too, where, as we talk about, it's not just 1, 2, 3, my grief is dealt with, I've mourned the loss, I'm okay. It just comes and goes as life happens. So I think a lot of that can be influenced by, it could be politics, it could be news of like, oh, this species is going extinct now. It can be, we're not, and there's so many different ways on how people think we should be approaching climate change. And so I think oftentimes if you have one idea in your head of this is what we should be doing to deal with climate change, but then you see maybe leaders not taking that path, you're going to feel some betrayal in that. And I think that can bring on that dread, that fear and panic of like, oh no, this person's not doing what I think is supposed to be the best route. I'm now grieving that, I think is what can trigger it. The big feelings, at least.
Okay. Yeah, it's like there's an asteroid headed for the planet type thing, and nobody's doing anything.
Yeah, like
right?
Don't Look Up, Adam McKay's book.
Oh, yeah, right.
Or movie.
Yeah.
Also just like natural, the disasters we see in the fires in California. And I think also the world we live in, we see it firsthand. Not quite to the degree that we're there, but almost,
Right.
The extreme weather events are not abnormal. They are very, very typical.
They're very typical, and we see them live.
Yes.
So that can be scary. Yeah. Climate change is impacting people now, and I think, like I know you kind of put in our outline today, talk about who it impacts the most, and I think from what this book is talking about, a lot of it is younger generations and people in maybe like oppressed societies who experience the effects much more directly because they are in environments where the disasters are very much so prevalent for them. Research is also showing that, like, this could impact us even more so in the next 20 years.
Right.
This is our lifetime and our children's. And so I think a lot of the questions that come up when people do have eco-anxiety, climate anxiety, I think they're kind of interchangeable, is like, should I have children? Does that feel wrong? If I believe like it will impact us in 20 years, like does that feel wrong? Or is it worth it, And so, and of course, like that's on a person by person basis, but I have read a lot of even like climate scientists, like the people who are in the trenches essentially, they have children. Many of them do. And so I read this one interview, I can't remember who it's by, I wish I had it, but he was kind of like, I noticed that a lot of these people had kids, like what's the deal with that? And someone was like, kids give us hope, they give us something to work toward. And I mean, that's very true. Like, I was motivated by things before my child, but now that I have my child, I'm like, oh, everything is for her.
Right. Yeah, so. But I even think people without children can still find hope in children, right? And knowing that, these young people will carry things on after me.
Yeah.
We can quote research all day long, and some people are going to believe it no matter, we've been trying to do this we're talking about spanking for since the 50s, right? I mean, we got now nearly, I think, 70 years of research that, that says it just doesn't help. Like, in some cases it's harmful, but at minimum it definitely isn't helping. But yet people will hold fast to their beliefs on certain things for whatever reason. And so the reality is that some people are really going to value what the research is saying and take it for what it is, and they're very science minded, and there's just some people that just aren't. I think we all agree that we want to kind of set up the generations ahead of us. I mean, I guess, below us, that are going to be there after we're gone, to succeed and make it a little bit easier for them to set those generations up after that. So, but I was kind of, where I was going with that is kind of like, with the people you're working with or people dealing with this, is how much of this climate anxiety also has to deal with feeling alone in it, and that there are, a good number of people that don't believe it, and so how do I, not only do I feel it, but like, whether it could be someone as close to me as my spouse, could be my mom or my dad, or, friends, or, a larger community that doesn't, that thinks I'm silly, or I'm afraid that's what they would think, is I'm just silly for feeling the way I feel.
Well, and sometimes it's like the extreme opposite too, where it's like, okay, well, you're silly for thinking there's hope. Or you're silly for even having hope that we can do anything,
Yeah.
And so that doesn't feel very good either.
Helplessness on
Right.
both sides.
Yeah, and I think like again, nothing is 100% guaranteed in life, but without hope, we just have dread, and that's exhausting, right? Like, why would I do anything in my life if that's all I'm feeling?
So to that point, though, what you're saying, is like when it comes to the climate and taking care of the planet and things like that, and making a difference, man, it really is a collective effort, right? I mean, one person recycling isn't really going to do much.
No.
Right. So when you're working with the individual who is dealing with climate anxiety, I mean, I can see how that, like, what am I
Like,
going to
what-
do?
yeah, what-
like,
what am I supposed
so
to do?
what
I'm one
do?
person.
So what does the therapist do with that? I mean, what is the approach there?
Yeah. And I think, first of all, like, as therapists, what we can do best is validate, right? Like, of course that feels scary. Even if a therapist doesn't agree with it, they can still say, like, that feels scary, right? Like, that, of course, that's a scary thing. Kind of like, again, working with betrayal trauma. I really do see a lot of parallels when I think about climate anxiety. Yeah. Just like, of course you feel gaslit, crazy, whatever, like those words are that people say in our offices. It's like, if that happened to me, or if I thought that way, I would feel pretty bad too. So I think, first of all, it's just validating. Like, even she has a whole page where she goes, it makes sense to be scared if you read this in the news. It totally is warranted if you feel this way. And I was like, man, just reading the way her buzzwords in that feels good. And I was thinking too, like, that's something that I need to remember, is like, first of all, sometimes people just want to be validated, as simple as it sounds. That's what we want.
Yeah. It's real for me.
Yeah. And I did read a good article from Dan Siegel, and he was talking about how, and as systemic therapists, we always think about how we exist in the context of our relationships, right? Like, we are not people without other people. And so he kind of talks about how I think a lot of times we just think about ourselves and like self-work, but we have to remember that self-work also includes working on relationships, working on our environments and the people around us. And I think that that's kind of the issue sometimes at hand, is like, especially if we're in survival mode, we're just like, what do I need to get through, or what does my family need to get through and survive? But it's like, you kind of need the whole environment around you to be good for you to be good too.
Yeah.
Right. Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if your thing that creates anxiety is going to be seen as going, at minimum, be dismissed, but at most be criticized and ridiculed, like that makes your problem threatening to your existence in that
In your
group, right?
relationships,
And we all know we need groups to. That's kind of what you were reflecting on. We need groups to survive, right? We need to belong. That's why if you ever deal with a sense of or a fear of not belonging, I think that is embedded in all of us to some degree. And so, like, if your belonging is threatened because of this thing you deal with, but who I'm supposed to ask my group, that's why my group exists, to help.
Yeah.
But I can't ask them for help because the thing I'm asking for help for might be so threatening to them that they, kick me out of the group, So I just stay quiet about it, keep it to myself.
I mean, that's like in systems, when we think about like what are the rules and roles and boundaries, and like we're kind of just playing the game to survive sometimes. But
Yeah.
when there's new information, it feels scary, even if it's not necessarily bad information, but it's new information,
Right.
and that's scary.
Scary.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can make you kind of wary. And if you're already feeling overwhelmed, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you seen any or made any like race correlations? Like, so I'm gonna let you go out on a limb and try to explain what I mean here, and hopefully I don't butcher it. When it comes to being validated, sometimes like we don't have to get it because we're not going to get it. You can't make yourself get it. But what we can do, and this is kind of influenced by Brene Brown.
I was just thinking about her.
Right, and
Yeah.
how she kind of, her take on empathy.
Yeah.
And basically saying empathy isn't how we've always thought about it, of like, I need to take the lenses off of which I see the world and then put your lenses on so I can see the world through your eyes. She's like, it's impossible because you only have your lens. Like, so you can't do it. So what is empathy? And she's like, it's believing people. It's just believing it's real for them, And so that's kind of what I was getting at.
Yeah. Like I keep bringing up betrayal trauma. Surprise! I don't know if you guys expected that, but I think of it too as like, oftentimes if I have a client who has felt betrayed by their partner, I often am telling the partner who did the acting out, like, this is new. This is not new information for you, but this is new information for them. So it's almost like it just happened. Yeah. So even though this is like a secret that you've had for years, this is new information to them, and they're having to understand and wrap their heads around that. And you kind of just need to believe that it's hard to hear, and it's hurtful. And so, because if it's the other way around, where it's just like, I think you kind of just need to get over it because it's not happening anymore. It's like, okay, but I'm still wrapping my head around the fact that it even happened.
Right.
That's hard.
It's not helpful. So is climate anxiety for you and the work that you've done with clients, is it so much about that you're having clients that are feeling the anxiety of what it means that, things are changing and there's scary risks? Are they suffering because people don't believe in the risk, or are they suffering just because they're aware of the risks? Is there one of those that you notice more than the other? Okay.
Yeah, I think like I've seen it more with younger clients, like younger adults who are asking questions of, do I have children? Okay. What is my responsibility? Should I be recycling and doing this? Like, what's within my control? But then also feeling every once in a while it can just hit you of like, this is too much. Like, I think what you were saying, Josh, like, I'm one person. What is the point in me doing any of this? That's, it doesn't feel like it's much. So I think I've seen a lot of that and just like overarching questions of what choices should I make for my future at this point in time. That's mostly where I've seen it.
What it's coming into.
Yeah. And then also, just because we are in Oklahoma, I think I've had more people who have felt kind of isolated of like being surrounded by family members and loved ones where they're like, I don't feel understood because I don't know if they agree.
So a little bit of both.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So then how do you help especially the people that are trying to make big life choices, right? Like, recycling is a choice, but to have children or not, to, buy or own property or things, or, deciding to be vegan, that's a big choice and commitment. Like, those are big things. So, I mean, how do you find yourself helping people through those?
Yeah, I feel like I like to remind people of like, you don't have to make a big decision today, right? Like, you have time. And, even just when I try to talk to clients about like working out, it's like, okay, if you tell yourself you're going to go in for 3 hours every day for 5 days, that's going to last a week. You're not gonna, that's not sustainable. if that,
You're very optimistic.
Yeah, and so I think it's like, okay, what's within your control and what are small changes you can make? And also looking at the resources that do have positivity. So like, if you're on Instagram a lot, what is something positive you can follow with climate change? Or if you, like to listen to podcasts, what is something that's gonna help you feel like there's something you can actually do rather than just be like, we're all going down. Yes. And so I think I try to reframe it of like, again, just what's within your control, and nothing has to be decided today. You can think about what are the first few small changes I can make. And I think that can go a long way.
And that's kind of the initial, when someone first comes in, this is kind of some of the things you would do.
And I do want to say, like, I don't feel quite like an expert in this. I still feel like I'm at the beginning of figuring out the best way to
Right.
approach clients when it comes to climate anxiety. Like I'm wanting to do more reading and research
Right.
with that.
So on that note, like for everybody to know, like you are not officially trained in or certified in
Correct.
climate anxiety treatment, which I think is
I want to, though.
there is that, right? There's
Yes.
that, and so. But I also think too, like my guess is that there aren't hardly anybody. I don't know any therapist. In fact, I didn't even know that you could get certified in it until you told me about it. So on that note, like you're as expert on it as anybody I would know
Yeah.
on it. So if somebody were to call
Yeah.
in here wanting to deal with this, it's like Mary's the
Very.
one. But I am glad that you're taking it upon yourself to get that training. Is
Yeah.
that still you still doing that?
Yeah, I got accepted to the program, and it'll start in the fall. So
Oh, awesome.
Good.
Awesome. So we'll have to have you back to talk.
when I
kind
know
of
more of what I'm talking
what
about, I'll be
your
like, forget everything I said. Here's actually what you should do.
But so kind of what I was getting at though is like that's your initial approach. But like, do you have in your mind like kind of where you're headed? Like when someone comes in for betrayal trauma work, for example, right? We know we got to do some crisis management, and that's kind of what you're talking about. Like we got to help kind of. Get the dust to settle, instead of, or whatever's stirring the dust up to get rid of that so it can settle
Yeah.
and people can come up for air. The problem isn't gone. But we also know, like, we've talked about this with like sex addiction treatment that, after a short period of time, we're hardly talking about sex at all.
Right.
At a certain, and we're talking
Yeah.
about trauma, and we're talking, we're taking a deep dive. So, is that where you anticipate, when it comes to climate anxiety, that you will be headed, is into like what is the thing that is really making it difficult to manage this, level
Yeah.
of uncertainty?
I kind of see it as like a mix of grief work, anxiety work, betrayal trauma is how I view it a little bit of like if someone comes in because they had a family member die, I don't have the perfect words. All I can say is, yeah, that happened and this is hard.
Yeah.
Like
Right.
there is no perfect magical thing I can say to that. And so sometimes, when we go seeking therapy, it really is sort of just that desire of I want someone to see me and see this pain. And so I think that that's kind of my initial approach. If someone comes in for specifically climate anxiety, I would just be like, yeah, this is scary.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Sure.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah. I just want to know.
I didn't know if there
like,
was another part to that I missed.
and what I want to be careful of saying is, or people hearing this, is suggesting in any way that when I said sex addiction, I think one thing we often would say, sex addiction isn't about sex. It's about a lot of other things. I don't want people to hear me saying that climate anxiety really isn't about climate.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But what I was wondering though is of like, how do I acknowledge it and do the things I can control and life still be manageable?
Yeah.
Right. That's probably, I would guess, as a therapist, kind of where you're headed is trying to figure out like what is going on for you that is making it so it feels so unmanageable, which I would
Right.
imagine has something to do with the feeling of uncertainty and
Yeah.
helplessness and
Yeah.
feeling alone and
Yeah.
things like that.
Yeah, like Dan Siegel even talks about in the same interview I had read where, he's like, it's fight, flight, or freeze. What are we going to do at first? It's crisis management. And then once we get that settled, like any therapeutic work, it's okay, let's dig deeper. Like, what does this mean to you? Why is this something that feels so fearful for you? Because something that's scary for me can also be scary for you, but maybe for different reasons.
Yeah. That's true.
So Dan Siegel writes about this too?
Oh, yeah. He does a lot of
Really?
work with mental health and climate
I mean, I know
change,
you
yeah.
mentioned him earlier, but I just thought you were referencing him from something else.
Yeah.
But
No,
he writes directly.
When I've tried to do, the little research that I have of trying to actually do the mental health approach, he has a lot of stuff on it.
Good.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
I'm interested in that.
Yeah.
You have a kid's book too, right?
I do.
That's not a Dan Siegel book then?
No, it's not.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, climate change for babies. I don't mean this to be like a condescending thing. It's just that I study behavioral sciences. I'm
Yeah.
not this type of scientist.
Environmental
Yes.
science,
And
yeah.
so I'm like, so anything that feels confusing, I'm like, please explain it to me like I'm 6, but then this is the best way because I'm like, this is for babies, right? Like I could read this to my kid and she's like, oh, I love reading about the earth. She's like, that's a circle.
Right.
The earth
But
is
the
round.
intent isn't
Earth
to
is
stress them out early. The
No,
intent
no.
is to help
Even at the end,
them understand what's going on.
it says
Right.
it
You're
says
right.
what can be done. You know,
Oh.
Yeah,
it still
yeah,
gives
yeah.
you like an idea of like, here are some things you can do within your control. And so when I read this to my daughter, I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
That's what we're
I
doing.
can do that.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I like that baby books are those really thick pages.
I know.
You know, makes you feel like you get a lot of traction.
Well, yeah, they hold up.
Yes.
Well, it's really interesting, Mary.
It is interesting.
I think like, one question I wanted to ask you before we wrap up is like, I know that you're just now kind of starting the process for yourself of getting the expertise that would make you feel more comfortable in saying you're an expert. But like, just sort of like where you are right now in it, like what if for someone that's listening to this, it's like, oh, this is a thing. Like I'm so glad I stumbled onto this. Like what is the thing you would want, someone to know that's listening to this that might be dealing with just climate anxiety?
Yeah, I would say you're not alone. Like, even if, I mean, I don't know. What would I want them to know? Why does that feel like a hard question?
Because it's big.
There's so many
You could
things.
give me a call.
How about that? Set up a time. Yeah.
Well, I think
There's resources out there. Like, this book is calming. Like,
I don't think it has to be complicated. Like,
Yeah.
I think you're not alone.
You're not
That's because
alone.
that's what I
Yeah,
was
I mean,
thinking
sure.
you'd say is there are people writing books on this stuff.
yeah.
Like you're
It's
you're
out
not
there for a
you're
reason.
also not you're not crazy.
Yeah, there's certifications for a reason, right?
Right.
That's right. That's
right.
right. Meaning a need.
Like, it's needed. Yeah, there's great resources out there. It doesn't have to be all doom and gloom, and it doesn't have to be completely invalidating. There's somewhere in between, which is like anything, right? It does kind of feel similar to also working with like LGBTQ plus communities because, a lot of times they want an affirming therapist. And so I think it feels similar to that in a way where it's like I affirm and can validate that I agree that this is something that's happening. And so I think that that's kind of where I will sit here and say that. I'm comfortable saying that. And so if that's something that someone needs, like I can also still work with clients who don't necessarily feel a fear of that. I do,
Right.
Right.
But I do want to say, like, if someone is like, I don't want to see a therapist who doesn't believe it's real, that,
Sure.
I mean,
That's
that makes
a good-
sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of
Yeah.
That wouldn't
sense.
feel
Yeah.
good. Yeah.
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 I mean, it's
You need to be seen
Yeah.
in the therapy room.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
right. Yeah. Well, it's fascinating. I really
It
hope
is.
that after you get going on your training that we can get another episode planned.
Come
'Cause I'd
Yeah,
like
teach
to-
us.
TBD.
Yeah, it'd be
Yeah.
interesting to
Yeah.
do. But yeah, I think that people listening to this that when we were talking about podcast guests, I was like, well, you should come talk about climate anxiety. Like,
And then I said, that makes me feel anxious. Josh.
yeah, we're gonna do an episode on podcast anxiety.
Yeah.
Yeah,
eventually.
podcast
Yeah, that's what Carrie is treating these days because it's personal to her.
That's right.
Well, I would love to follow up with you to kind of get what you're learning and for people listening to this that it isn't like you can have your personal beliefs and your personal thoughts on this stuff. It's not something you battle with. That's fine. Yeah, that's not we're not here to judge people on what is making life difficult for them. I mean, there's a lot of things that people deal with that come in our office that they're embarrassed about, or they're scared. And I'm not saying you should be embarrassed about that. I shouldn't say you should be embarrassed about anything that you go to therapy for, but that is the reality. They're embarrassed. They're scared. They feel alone. They don't feel like anybody else gets it. And sometimes, it's the therapist is the first one to ever say, I get, it's okay to feel what you're feeling. Like you're not crazy. You're not out of your mind. It makes sense to you, and that's what we got to figure out what's going on so we can help you, be able to, self-regulate.
Yeah.
So.
I love the the part that you read from the book about it's the reflection of being attached to the earth. And that just, I think, is the best way to summarize it because no matter what you're pursuing, if you're pursuing mental health, whatever brings you to pursuing mental health, I think one of the key ways to access mental health is being connected to something bigger than you and also feeling grounded to where you are, which that's the earth, right? When we look at what are the best ways to, regulate your nervous system, it's being outside, moving, in the sunshine, interacting with people in nature, right? I mean, that's
Yeah.
really the formula. And so, to me, when people are, feeling distress or grief around the way that the planet is changing and what we're losing, it's, to me, it reflects that you do have this, and I think we do have this deep connection to our home, right? And so that's what sits with me, and I think kind of an attachment lens, first of all, just fits the way I see the world, but also I think is real intrinsic, right? And I think people really understand that. And so just to say, I don't even need to bring you, studies. Like when you go outside, and I can't grow some things in my yard like I used to grow because it's too hot now. There's too many extremes. That's sad. I'm not, can't connect in that way. And I think a lot of people can connect, can have had some similar kind of small experience with that. So I think that's what struck me the most was that part when you read from that book.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks
Thanks
for
for
having
having
me.
me.
Come
Yeah.
back.
Yeah.
I love having you here on Friday.
I know.
Thanks for listening to me.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in.